8 and 8. Yeah, I want to welcome the motion from Sinn Féin. Just to say at the start, it's very timely given the recent attacks by Denis O'Brien and Dermot Desmond on the pensions of independent news and media workers. And I'd like to send our solidarity from AA People Before Profit to those workers, and indeed to the thousands of workers whose pension benefits and their rights to a decent pension are now questioned and are under attack as being unrealistic. I note the counter-motion by the Government, and I must say, Ministers, how pathetic this is. It's part of a wider narrative that tries to put the issues of pensions into a certain light. So we're told that because people are living longer, it's a problem, not something to be celebrated. We can only fund pensions from a fixed pot of money. That's a problem. If we increase one category, it'll mean cutting from some other category. That's a problem. And of course, the idea that the poverty rate among pensioners is lower than any other groups, according to the Government's own facts, that's a problem, which might partially explain their heroic efforts in the recent past to increase the poverty levels of pensioners. So pensions and the very idea of a decent pension when you finish your working life is seen as a threat to the economy and is no longer realistic, except of course for people in this House and particularly for ministers. So I'm struck by the fact that while Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael were congratulating themselves on giving pensioners an extra £5 a week, the actual policy of this and of past governments has been to undermine, cut and reduce the entitlements of workers to a state pension and to force them to work longer. And when I raised this issue with Minister Varadkar, he suggested that the policy on changing the bands for a contributory pension was motivated by a desire to be fair to those who had worked longer. Like most of what ministers say on any of these issues, it is totally disingenuous. My amendment to the Social Welfare Act on this issue was ruled out of order, and therefore we could have made changes without having to continually battle on this issue, but again ruled out of order by the Minister. So I think that the purpose of making these changes was to save the state costs, and the state are very keen to save themselves costs at the behest of workers, but not by bailing out bankers to the tune of £8 billion a year plus on interest, and by refusing Apple tax. By changing these bands, the state will save themselves £50 million in 2017 and £10 million each year cumulatively afterwards. By scrapping the transition pension, the state will save £75 to £80 million a year, roughly. And by increasing the paid contributions needed for a contributory pension to 520, the state saves £6 million a year. Nice bit of save, a nice bit of piggy bank pocketing there. And of course, as the years go by and workers have to live and work longer, work till they're 68 in fact, more millions will be saved by the state. This money is taken from the pockets of pensioners and nobody else. It will be used to fund other essential services despite the self-serving platitudes. It will not be used to fund other services despite the self-serving platitudes of ministers, because we still find a huge shortage in hospitals, in education, in special needs, etc. It's not filling a hole. And in relation to the problem of people living longer, what is often missed in this debate, that workers who are living longer today, longer than past generations, are in fact fully paid for in financial terms because Irish workers over the last few decades have become more and more productive. You only have to look up the statistics. It's entirely possible to keep and to improve pension entitlements of workers who are living longer, but we can do it and continue to widen the inequality in the share of the national wealth going to workers in terms of wages and pensions, compared with the share going to the wealthy and to capital and to profits. And that is at the core of the so-called crisis in our pensions. It's not the greater longevity of the workforce of the people, it's not trying to balance the different interest groups, but it's in fact a greater and greater share of the national wealth which goes to the wealthy, other than going to social services and to going to workers' wages. That's what's happening. It's very clear, and it's very clear from the way that independent news and media have treated their workers and their pensioners. What's happening at state level is reflected right through the working force. So again, if we come to, I'll have to mention again the 13 billion rejected from Apple and the countless billions that are refusing to take from the REITs, from the multinational corporations, from the hospitality sector and from the load of wealth that exists in this country. This is the root cause of the crisis in pensions. And this debate, as I say, is timely in a week when the shareholders of independent news and media were sanctioned a smash and grab of workers' pensions to improve the financial position of none other than Denis O'Brien and Dermot Desmond. And let's be honest, these are two people whom by no stretch of the imagination need more money. It's timely that we set out a rejection of their logic, the logic of the state that thinks that forcing working people to work longer for less and discriminating against workers is a just cause or makes economic sense. I just finally want to go over the one peculiar and outrageous example of how the state thinks that discrimination against women is okay, and which goes to the heart of this motion and this debate. Some months ago, when I was dealing with constituents, I was amazed to discover that the state believes it's okay to discriminate against women because it is women who overwhelmingly raised their families in this country before 1994. But they made the adjustment to take into account the homemakers after 1994 and to penalise those who made their home before 1994. We actually have legislation that says while we recognise that workers might take time off to raise their families, we'll take those years into consideration when calculating their contributory pension, but we won't do this for families before 1994. How ridiculous. It's both, as previous deputies said, discrimination on gender basis and discrimination on age basis. And so, to conclude, many women who recently retired and raised families in the decades of the 60s, the 70s and the 80s, an era when women, generally speaking, began their families much younger, and when women, and the record will show this, suffered greatly in many guises and under many headings by living in this state, they find that their expected contributory pension is reduced, very much reduced, often by as much as €30 a week. This is both insulting and is doubly hurtful, and it must end. I don't accept the argument that if we correct this discrimination, we have to hit some other vulnerable group. It's nonsense to mask the state's contempt for women and to try and justify the taking of €30 a week from women who work for decades from their contributions to the state. This is the revealing aspect of this debate, that the willingness of the state is there to legislate to discriminate and to take money from some of the most powerless groups in our society at a very key and important stage of their lives. And let's compare it, deputies, let's really think about this and compare it with the lethargy and the slowness to legislate for rent controls or to deal with corporate fraud. It actually stands out in stark contrast with the way we deal with one group as against the other. So, as I said at the beginning, I welcome the debate and of course we're supporting it, but I don't think this is the end of this issue. I think it's going to require campaigning, people power and political pressure to put an end to this blatant discrimination.
Thank you.